Hello team, today I'm going to show you how to paint different types of gradients, different types of blends and practice these so that you can apply these to any painting that you do. So grab your paints, grab your brush and let's get started. There are so many different ways that we can blend our watercolor paint. So let me show you what we're going to do. First of all, you need your paints, your water, your paintbrush, your rag, and your watercolor paper. It's really important that this isn't normal paper. You may also want to have a big hunk chunk. So this is a number 14. It's from Artway. I will list these in the description or wherever you see this video. And this one is a number 6. So just be mindful of the type of head that you've got. This is a round-headed brush. I think I'm forgetting all my terminology. And this is a flat-headed brush. So if you do go for other brands, there are plenty out there that are really good. Just make sure you're looking for the right top of the brush. So these are the paints that I use. Derwent Inkset 1. Again, I'm going to leave a little link in the description just in case you don't have them and you want to use the same paints as me. These are great for beginners. They're less than 20 quid and they last such a long time. I've had these for a couple of years and a lot of people use them and I've barely made a dent in them. So Derwent Inkset 1, I think. Now there's 2 different ways that you can blend. You can use a technique called wet on wet and a technique called wet on dry. Whenever I talk about that, I get a lot of giggles in group workshops, especially with men. So keep your mind out of the gutter. We're going to start with wet on wet. So that just means that we have a wet piece of paper and we apply wet color to it. Now, the amount of water that you use can really affect the type of blend and how it looks. So all I want you to do to start is get a little bit of water and just paint 3 squares. So you notice I don't re-dip. I'm just picking one blob of water up and I'm popping it on my paper. And if I just show you this on the camera, you can see one's really pooling, one's kind of okay, and one's nearly dry. So the 3 different amounts of water will affect how you're blending. Now, let's start with this middle one. I am just gonna paint a little rectangle or square underneath, and I like to make sure I go up and down and make it nice and even. Now, this is gonna try to dry. The paper is gonna try to absorb the water, so I need to be really quick. I've mixed my color and I'm just going left to right into the middle. I want to clean my brush in between, scrape off the excess. Actually, no, I want to pick up a little bit of color, so I do want it to be a bit wet. And then I want to go from the bottom and go to the middle and just give that a couple of strokes. Pick that up. You might have a little pool. A lot of people do. This is when I dry the brush. I want to have a look at it. If it's soaking, I could just use a dry brush to soak that up and push that away. Now, let it dry because science happens in between the painting process. So we'll come back to that in a second, see what it looks like, give it another go if we need to. Now I wanted to do the same technique again with these 2 colors, but this time we're going to go wet on dry. So I'm just going to pick up that color straight away, add some more pigment if it's run out, and then I'm going to go left to right, clean the brush. I will dry it this time because I don't need it to be soaking wet. And then I want to go left to right, go to the middle, and then let's clean and dry that brush there. Now, on this one, on wet on dry, did your paint dry before your blue touched it or your second color touched it? Because if it did, you might be left with a harsh line. That means, 1, either your room is really warm, you can't control that, that's fine. But it just means that the paper and the paint were really working hard to dry and to take that paint on as quick as possible. The other thing it can mean is that your paintbrush was really dry. So adding a little bit more juice to your brush will really help to give you an extra second, give you a little bit to work with and to try that one again. So they're both tricky. They both have their challenges. This one initially that will make your paint a little bit lighter because you've got water underneath and water acts as our white. So the more water we have, the more white of the paper we're going to see. But often this can create the softest look. Mine has a little bit of a glow in between. And I think that's just because the water displacement was maybe a little bit too wet. So I would be tempted to try that again, but we're going to do that in a second anyway. This one looks really clean, but the edges are going to be really crisp, whereas these edges are soft, and it doesn't leave you much time to get the blend. So I'm a bit more experienced than maybe what you are when you're seeing this, so I just about managed to do it. But if you didn't manage to do it, try it again. Keep trying until you get it. And if you did manage to do it, fucking well done. Proud of you. Okay, so we're going to use a big brush now because sometimes we like to paint big, large spaces like sunsets. So I'm just going to cover that area. And then I'm going to pick up my color. So let's start with a red. Make sure that's nice and juicy, but not too wet. So if you want to add a bit more pigment, mix it in well. And then let's go for it. So I'm always going from left to right and going a little bit further down than I want to be. So then pick up my next color. So scrape off as much excess as you can. But again, we don't want it dry. I want to overlap those colors and just go left to right and overextend that. So clean that brush in between. I'll use this blue just because it's there. And then I will go from the middle and just push that up a little bit. So there's a lot of water there. So I can just dry the brush, go over that again, soak up any excess. And if it's still wet enough, I think my top layer might not be, but I can just go over two of them and just gently go over that as well. So you're giving it that extra massage, the extra massage to bring the two together. Now here I've got that little glow again, so I can just bring that paint up, go from the middle, I can bring that paint down. So you can only do this if it's wet enough. If it is too dry, best thing to do is leave it, let it dry, go over it again, and try that whole process again. Now, watercolors dry a little bit lighter than what they are painted as. So I like to edge on the air of caution, or is it air on the edge of caution? Unsure. And I like to go a little bit lighter so that I can do another layer, because if you make a mistake in your first layer, all you're going to do is see that. So go a little bit lighter, add a bit more water in your pigment, and that's going to be much more pleasant to paint. Now, grab another piece of paper. We're going to try a couple of different ways that we can blend. In this one, I want to blend my color all the way down to white. So I can do wet on dry, and I can also do wet with wet. So let me show you how that makes sense. First, choose my color. Now, this one, we can just wait until the brush runs out of pigment. So if I just go left to right, eventually we're going to run out of pigment. It's going to naturally show more of that paper through. So you do get a bit of gradient, but then of course your bottom bit gets a little bit scratchy, which could look good depending on what you're painting. But we don't always want our blend, our gradient to kind of last that long. So instead, I want to pick up my color, do a little bit of color, clean the brush, drag out any excess or scrape off any excess, and just use a damp brush. I can go up a little bit, but then I want to bring that down. So if your color, your pigment is strong and it's still going, clean the brush properly, bring that down again. So this gradient, this blend from color to white is super useful for lots of different paintings that we do. So this is a really important technique to try. If you want to really push yourself, why don't you try a thick pigment? So literally that line, and let's try and blend that as quick as possible, because that was really dry, but that gave us the highest pigment, which meant we had a nice thick color. So I'm trying to make that gradient much, much smaller. We've got a long gradient, medium gradient, and then a small gradient there. So 3 different gradients that we can play with. This one was just the brush dragging down, and then this one was a little bit of water, and this one was a little bit of paint. Okay, so our final way that we can blend colors is to have color underneath, which kind of acts as our wet on wet. But this time, I'm going to mix 2 colors together. I chose the wrong one. I'm going to mix this green and this green to give myself an average green. All right. So it has to be super juicy in here. You see how it's like falling amongst itself. Some people mix colors like this and it drives me nuts. Don't do that. Get yourself a lot of color, a lot of pigment. Okay, I'm just going to do a bit of a splodge. Not too worried about it. And then I want to pick up a bit of pigment. So I'm checking in the palette, how juicy is it? And then this could be some sort of foliage thing. So if I just dab some things in there, let it dry, literally don't overwork it. One of the biggest mistakes we make as watercolor painters is we overwork it. We want to let that dry And it might not blend like this. It might not blend like these colors here, but it gives you a different type of blend. So just give that a go. Color first and then add a second color on top and see what that looks like. Okay, team. So play with those paintings. They are not something that you can really show your friends and be like, yep, look, I painted a really nice picture today. But these techniques will help you massively for when you are ready to start your painting. So let me know how you get on. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll catch you next time for another video.